Prince Harry came to the Today Show that day full of confidence, but one single question from Savannah Guthrie completely destroyed him. The confrontation that followed became one of the most shameful television moments in royal family history. The Today Show studio gleamed under its signature lighting as crew members made final preparations for what was scheduled to be another routine celebrity interview. The iconic Studio 1A, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Rockefeller Plaza, had witnessed countless memorable television moments over the decades. This morning, however, would add another chapter to that history, one that no one in the building could have anticipated. Savannah Guthrie sat at the curved anchor desk, methodically reviewing her research notes. As one of television journalism's most respected figures, she had built her reputation on thorough preparation and incisive questioning. Her approach was methodical, professional, and devastatingly effective when she sensed inconsistencies in a guest's narrative. Today's interview had been billed as a friendly promotional appearance, but Savannah's instincts told her there were deeper stories to uncover. Hoda Kotb occupied her usual position beside Savannah, her warm personality providing the perfect complement to her co-anchor's more analytical approach. But even Hoda could sense that today's interview might venture beyond the usual promotional boundaries. The booking had come together quickly, perhaps too quickly, and there was something about the rushed nature of Prince Harry's latest media appearances that suggested desperation rather than strategy. Carson Daly and Craig Melvin completed the hosting panel, both seasoned professionals who understood that live television could take unexpected turns. The studio atmosphere carried an underlying tension that experienced broadcasters learned to recognize. The feeling that a seemingly routine interview might explode into something far more significant. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the NBC studios at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Prince Harry emerged wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit with a burgundy tie, his appearance carefully calculated to project both authority and accessibility. His smile was confident, perhaps even slightly arrogant, as he waved to the small crowd of photographers and fans who had gathered despite the early hour. His security detail was notably smaller than in previous American television appearances, consisting of just 2 plainclothes officers who seemed more concerned with crowd control than actual protection. This reduction in security reflected either overconfidence in his current standing with the American public or budget constraints that his team preferred not to acknowledge publicly. The Green Room provided a temporary refuge from the controlled chaos of morning television production. Harry sat in a leather chair, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee from a NBC-branded mug. His latest book had been generating headlines for weeks, though not always the kind his publicity team had hoped for. Critics had begun pointing out inconsistencies in his various claims, but Harry had grown accustomed to dismissing such criticism as jealousy or deliberate misinterpretation. His remaining publicist sat nearby, occasionally offering reassuring comments about the interview's likely direction. The team had been significantly reduced since the early days of his American media blitz, partly due to financial constraints and partly because Harry had begun to believe he could handle these appearances without extensive preparation. This hubris would prove to be a critical miscalculation. 10 minutes to air, a production assistant announced, and Harry felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that accompanied live television appearances. He had done dozens of these interviews by now and had developed what he believed was an effective strategy: control the emotional temperature, redirect difficult questions toward his charitable work, and always maintain the moral high ground as someone seeking healing and reconciliation. His phone buzzed with a text message from Meghan, wishing him luck and reminding him to stay positive. The message brought a slight smile to his face, reinforcing his confidence that this interview would follow the same pattern as the others: sympathetic questions, respectful treatment, and another opportunity to reinforce his carefully crafted narrative about seeking privacy while sharing his truth. The walk from the Green Room to Studio 1A felt routine, almost mundane. Bright lights, efficient crew members, and the quiet professionalism of network television production created an environment he had grown comfortable navigating. Multiple cameras tracked his movement as he made his way to the interview area, their operators already anticipating the kinds of shots that would work best for various story angles. Savannah Guthrie stood to greet him first, her handshake firm and professional. "Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for being here this morning. We're really looking forward to our conversation." "Please, just Harry," he replied, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of royal precision and attempted American casualness that had become his signature sound. "And thank you for having me, Savannah. It's always a pleasure to be here." Hoda joined the greeting, followed by Carson and Craig, each offering the kind of pre-interview pleasantries designed to put guests at ease. The conversation touched on the usual topics: the weather, the studio's recent renovations, and how wonderful it was to see him again. But beneath the surface cordiality, professional instincts were already at work. Savannah had noticed something in Harry's demeanor that struck her as slightly off. There was a cockiness to his bearing that seemed at odds with someone who claimed to be seeking privacy and healing. His responses to casual questions carried an undertone of defensiveness, as if he was preparing for attacks that hadn't yet materialized. These subtle signals activated her journalistic radar in ways that would prove devastating for her guest. 2 minutes to live, the floor director announced, and everyone took their positions in the interview area. Harry settled into the guest chair with casual confidence, crossing his legs and leaning back in a posture that projected ease and control. His memoir sat prominently on the coffee table between them, positioned at the perfect angle to catch the studio lights and remind viewers of the book's commercial purpose. The red recording lights blinked on, and suddenly they were broadcasting live to millions of homes across America. "Good morning, and welcome to Today," Savannah began with her characteristic authority and warmth. "I'm Savannah Guthrie, and we're joined this morning by Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, who's here to discuss his deeply personal new memoir. Harry, welcome back to Today." "Good morning, Savannah." "Good morning, everyone," Harry replied, his smile bright and camera-ready. "Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be back with the Today family." Hoda leaned forward with genuine interest. "This book is incredibly revealing, Harry. You've shared some very personal details about your relationships, your struggles, your family dynamics. What made you decide that now was the right time to tell these particular stories?" It was exactly the kind of softball question he had anticipated, and Harry's response flowed with practiced ease. He spoke eloquently about the importance of breaking cycles of trauma, about the healing power of sharing one's authentic experiences, and about his hope that his story might help others who were struggling with similar challenges. His answers were polished, media-trained, and designed to position him as both vulnerable and heroic. For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded exactly according to his team's playbook. The questions were sympathetic, focused on his mental health advocacy and charitable work. Harry felt himself settling into the familiar rhythm of a promotional interview, his confidence growing with each successfully navigated topic. But then Savannah's tone shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible to viewers but immediately obvious to Harry. Her smile remained warm, but something in her posture had changed, a subtle straightening that suggested she was about to move into more challenging territory. "Harry," she said, setting down her notes and looking directly at him, "I want to ask you about something that's been bothering me as I've followed your story over the past few years." The slight change in her demeanor activated Harry's internal warning systems, though he maintained his composed exterior. "Of course, Savannah. What's on your mind?" Savannah leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying a sharpness that hadn't been there moments before. "You've spoken extensively about wanting privacy for your family, about protecting your children from the same media scrutiny that you experienced growing up. But at the same time, you've been incredibly public about the most intimate details of your life. How do you reconcile those two positions?" Harry's smile became slightly more forced, but he had faced this question before and had a prepared response. "I think there's an important distinction between sharing your story on your own terms and having your story told by others who don't know the full truth. But that's exactly what I want to understand," Savannah continued, her journalist instincts fully engaged now. "In this book, you've made some very serious allegations about your family members. You've shared private conversations, intimate moments, personal conflicts. How is that protecting their privacy?" The studio atmosphere shifted palpably as the other hosts realized that Savannah was taking the interview in a direction none of them had anticipated. Harry's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "I've been very careful to focus on my own experiences and perspectives," he said, his voice carrying a defensive edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone, I'm trying to heal." Savannah's expression remained professional, but her eyes had taken on the focused intensity that had made her one of television's most formidable interviewers. "But healing for whom, Harry? Because some of the people you've written about might feel differently about having their private moments shared with the world." Harry's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, began to fidget with his wedding ring, a tell that body language experts would later analyze in detail. "I think anyone who reads the book with an open mind will understand that my intention was never to cause harm." "Intention is one thing," Savannah pressed, her voice carrying the relentless quality that had made her reputation in journalism. But impact is another. And the impact of some of these revelations has been quite significant, hasn't it? The question hung in the air with uncomfortable weight. Harry's composure was beginning to crack in ways that were subtle but unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. His breathing had become slightly more shallow, and his smile had taken on a brittle quality. "I think that's a matter of perspective," he replied, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the interview. Savannah leaned back slightly, studying him with the same intensity she had once used to cross-examine political figures during her White House correspondent days. "Let me ask you something more specific, then. In the book, you describe a physical altercation with your brother. You provide very detailed descriptions of what he said, how he acted, even how he looked. Were you taking notes during this fight, or are you reconstructing these conversations from memory years later?" The question struck at the heart of one of the book's most controversial passages, and Harry's face flushed slightly as he struggled to formulate a response. "I have a very good memory for emotionally significant moments. But that's the thing about memory," Savannah continued, her voice taking on an almost professorial tone. "It's not a recording device, is it? Memory is subjective. It changes over time. It's influenced by our emotions, our current circumstances, our desire to tell a particular version of events. So when you present these conversations as verbatim quotes, aren't you essentially asking readers to trust your interpretation of events rather than accept them as objective fact?" Harry's breathing had become noticeably more labored, and his voice cracked slightly as he responded. "These are my experiences, Savannah. This is my truth. I lived these moments." "Your truth again," Savannah said, and there was something in the way she emphasized those words that made it clear she was drawing a distinction. "That's a phrase you use frequently. But truth shouldn't really need a possessive pronoun, should it? Either something happened the way you describe it, or it didn't." The studio had become almost preternaturally quiet, with even the usually bustling production crew seeming to pause their activities to focus on the confrontation unfolding before them. Harry's composure was unraveling in real time, and everyone could sense it. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation," Harry said, his voice rising just enough to be noticeable to viewers. Savannah's expression remained calm and professional, but her questioning had taken on the relentless quality of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Am I? Because here's what troubles me, Harry. You've built a narrative around being the victim in these family conflicts. But when you share private conversations, when you reveal intimate family moments, when you profit from these revelations, doesn't that make you the aggressor?" The words hit Harry like a physical blow. His face went white, then flushed red, and his hands began to tremble slightly as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "That's not, you're twisting my words. You're taking things out of context." "I'm not twisting anything," Savannah replied, her voice remaining maddeningly calm in contrast to his escalating emotion. "I'm simply pointing out the contradiction between claiming to want privacy while simultaneously sharing the most private details of your family's life with millions of strangers." Harry's eyes filled with tears of rage and humiliation, and his voice broke as he attempted to defend himself. "You don't understand what it was like. You don't know what I went through." "You're right," Savannah acknowledged. "I wasn't there. But neither were the millions of people you're asking to buy your book and believe your version of events. So help me understand, why should they trust someone who seems to change his story depending on the audience?" The question was devastating in its simplicity and directness. Harry sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words that wouldn't come. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, streaming down his cheeks in a display of emotion that was being broadcast live to millions of viewers. "Because," he began, then stopped. His voice was barely above a whisper when he continued, "Because it's the truth. Because I lived it." "But which truth, Harry?" Savannah's voice carried no malice, but her words were surgical in their precision. "The truth you told 5 years ago about how much you loved your family? The truth you told 3 years ago about wanting to continue serving the crown? Or this new truth about how terrible everything was? Which version should we believe?" Something inside Harry completely snapped. He shot to his feet so violently that his chair rocked backward, nearly toppling over. His face was contorted with rage and humiliation, and his carefully styled hair was now disheveled from his nervous gesturing. "This interview is over," he declared, his voice breaking on every word. "I came here in good faith, expecting a respectful conversation, not an ambush." Savannah remained seated, looking up at him with an expression of calm professionalism that somehow made his emotional breakdown appear even more dramatic by contrast. I'm not ambushing you, Harry. I'm asking you to explain the inconsistencies in your own public statements. Inconsistencies? Harry's voice had risen to nearly a shout, though he was still trying to maintain some semblance of control. These aren't inconsistencies, this is my life. These are my experiences. And you're sitting here trying to fact-check my emotions like I'm some kind of criminal. No one's treating you like a criminal, Savannah replied, her voice carrying the steady authority that had made her one of journalism's most respected figures. But when someone makes public allegations that affect other people's lives and reputations, those allegations become subject to scrutiny. That's how journalism works. Harry grabbed his copy of the memoir from the coffee table, clutching it against his chest like a shield. You people never change. You invite us here, you pretend to be supportive, and then you attack us when we're most vulnerable. Vulnerable? Savannah's eyebrows rose slightly. Harry, you're a grown man who chose to write a tell-all book about your family for profit. That's not vulnerability, that's a business decision. The word struck him like a slap across the face. Harry staggered slightly, then turned toward the exit with jerky, uncoordinated movements that betrayed the depth of his emotional distress. I'm done with this, he said, his voice thick with tears and rage. I'm done with all of you. As he reached the edge of the studio area, Savannah delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire interview. Harry, she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent studio. The next time you want to tell your truth, make sure it's actually true. Otherwise, people might start to wonder if you're just another entitled man who can't handle being held accountable for his choices. Harry stopped dead in his tracks, his entire body trembling with barely contained fury. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and physically confront her. Instead, he pressed both hands to his face, let out what sounded like a sob, and ran toward the exit. His footsteps echoed frantically against the studio floor as he fled, the sound amplifying in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the entire space. The cameras followed him until he disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a quiet so complete that even the ambient noise of the building seemed to have stopped. For several long moments, nobody moved. Savannah sat calmly at the anchor desk, her expression professional despite having just delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in television history. The other hosts remained frozen, each processing what had just occurred in their own way. Finally, Hoda broke the silence with a slight clearing of her throat. Well, she said, her voice carefully neutral, that was certainly unexpected. Savannah turned to face the camera with the composure that had made her a trusted figure in American journalism. When we come back, we'll be discussing the latest developments in international news with our foreign correspondent. But everyone knew that nothing could follow what they had just witnessed. The rest of the show would be a mere footnote to a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years to come. As the cameras cut away for commercial, the hosting team sat in contemplative silence. They had all covered major stories before, but this felt different. This felt like the complete exposure of a carefully manufactured public persona in real time. Do you think we went too far? Hoda asked quietly. Savannah shook her head slowly. Those were legitimate questions that needed to be asked. If he couldn't handle them, that tells us more about the validity of his claims than any prepared statement ever could. Carson, who had remained largely silent during the confrontation, finally spoke up. His people are going to say we ambushed him. Let them, Savannah replied. The questions we asked are the same ones millions of people have been thinking. If asking someone to explain their own contradictions constitutes an ambush, then maybe they shouldn't be making contradictory statements in the first place. Meanwhile, somewhere in the NBC building, Prince Harry was probably locked in a bathroom, trying to compose himself enough to face the inevitable photographers waiting outside. His reduced security team was likely scrambling to coordinate an exit strategy that would minimize further embarrassment. But the damage was irreversible. In less than 30 minutes, one of television's most respected journalists had systematically dismantled years of carefully managed public relations work. She had exposed the fundamental contradictions in his narrative, questioned his motives, and reduced him to tears on live television. Whether you agreed with her methods or not, one thing was undeniable. She had asked the questions that needed to be asked, and his response, or complete lack thereof, had revealed more about his character than any ghost-written memoir ever could. The truth, as Savannah had noted, doesn't need a possessive pronoun. And sometimes, the most revealing truth is found not in what people claim about themselves, but in how they react when those claims are challenged by someone who refuses to be impressed by titles or celebrity status. In those 30 minutes, America had witnessed the complete deconstruction of a modern royal's carefully crafted victim narrative. And the architect of that deconstruction had been a fearless journalist who understood that accountability doesn't recognize privilege.